The thing I noticed when they rolled Talva's body onto the slab was the stain at his collarbone. Not blood, he hadn't bled externally, but something darker than subdermal bruising. It was almost matte in finish, like bruised fruit skin, except it ran along the lymphatic chain instead of pooling at gravity points. Unnatural distribution. That's always the first flag. We were 17 days into atmospheric settlement on EOS 7, the fourth terrestrial candidate in the Gliese 667 system. After a 500-year cryo transit aboard the Ark ship Peregrine Horizon, the first wave of colonists, engineers, techs, med staff had been reactivated and deployed across the surface. The planet's atmosphere had checked out. 82% nitrogen, 17% oxygen, mild trace gases, no known pathogens, radiation clean. Command called it habitable. I called it unproven. Nobody asked me. Case identifier: Delta Echo November, Tango Alpha Lima, 082. Subject: Den Talva, male, age 42, occupation, mess hall nutrient distribution technician, first wave colonist, cryogenic phase completed 17 days prior to death. Time of death: 0611 hours, standard cycle. Official cause: systemic circulatory failure. Secondary notation: gastroesophageal rupture attributed to stress. That part was handwritten. Someone upstairs didn't like the look of it. The morgue, officially Autopsy Suite 3A, sits in the base of the medical module, buried one deck below the surface habitat under 20 centimeters of polymer-shielded tungsten. Keeps the room thermally inert and pressure stable. Nothing in here corrodes fast unless you want it to. Medical is one module in a prefabricated surface complex, dropped and auto-assembled by drone 2 weeks before we touched down. Gravity here runs at 0.92 Earth standard. Not enough to feel float, but enough that circulation changes show up on autopsy. I log those too. We're shielded against wind shear and thermal drift, but nothing about this place feels permanent. The walls flex more than they should. Materials fatigue faster than expected. They keep the room at a constant 5 degrees Celsius. Cold enough to delay early degradation. Warm enough that I don't need to work through gloves, which matters. Sensory feedback's critical when dissecting vascular anomalies, and this, whatever it was, wasn't routine embolic failure. He hadn't choked, he'd ruptured. From the inside. I powered up the FFT-90, my portable autopsy bench. It hums when it lifts, servo bed adjusting height by the weight of the subject. Den wasn't heavy. Most of us lost about 8% body mass post-thaw. Cryo reactivation initiates fluid draw and intracellular restructuring, but you never really put the weight back on. We live lean out here and die leaner. His skin was cold but not stiff. Early stage lividity at the lower extremities, consistent with collapse in a seated position. I ran a lateral scan to confirm vitals. No organ shifts from trauma, no visible fractures. But his intestinal cavity was under pressure. Not bloat, not gas. Something had inflated the lymph network. I didn't say anything aloud. I rarely do. I just recorded the scan overlay. Standard cut, midline, xiphoid to pubic. No surprises on the surface layer, slight yellowing of the fascia, nothing extreme. But once I separated the costal margin and pulled the rib shield, the lungs told a different story. They were dry. Lungs should be slick, at least modestly hydrated. These looked desiccated, like sponge material left under a UV panel too long. I touched the left lobe with a probe. It resisted. Dense. I sectioned it along the sagittal line and found a fibrous matrix lining the bronchial tree. Not mucus, not scar tissue, some kind of structured weave. Uniform intervals branching like ductwork, almost architectural. At 0703 hours, I took a sample. FFT's onboard sampler confirmed protein signatures similar to cytokeratin, 18 and laminin, common structural proteins in epithelial cells. But there was overlap. Multiple amino chains resembled artificial peptides used in early-gen smart fabric bioskins. That made no sense. No one's wearing bioskin on this colony. It was outlawed after the last Martian graft trials. I paused, scanned the surgical record again. No external contaminant listed, no implants, no known medical conditions. Yet this structure was internal, integrated and precise, built, not grown. The morgue doors opened behind me. Juno Berwick stepped in, dragging his boots harder than necessary, probably to announce himself without speaking. He smelled like metal fatigue and ionized coolant, same as always. "Got a filter off vent node 4, he said. "Came back half choked with mesh growth. Not dust. This stuff's elastic. Thought you'd want to look." I nodded towards the secondary tray. "Set it there. Bag's intact." He grunted. "Double sealed. You'll want tweezers. This ship moves when it dries." That was new. Juno Berwick handled atmospheric maintenance, specifically closed-loop filtration and O2 regulation across the habitat's primary habs. On a normal colony, he'd be 3 levels down the food chain. But out here on EOS 7, anyone who controlled air quality got real important, real fast. He didn't linger, didn't look at Talva. I respected that. Some people need a buffer between life and death. Juno didn't pretend he had one. Once he left, I scanned the sample he'd brought. Fine threads, carbonized on the ends, coated in something translucent, an exudate or enzyme layer. When I brushed one with a probe tip, it twitched slightly. I checked ambient airflow. None. I checked temperature delta, stable. I noted the movement but didn't draw a conclusion. A body and a filter mesh, both showing structural growths where they shouldn't. 2 data points don't make a pattern, but they make a corner. At 0912 hours, Ruland Geis paged my comm. His voice came soft, almost embarrassed. "Arik, you free? Need your eyes on something. Not dead." Ruland ran cryo systems from Deck B4. He was in charge of reactivation sequencing, neural phase integrity, and scheduled wake cycling. He didn't normally call me, which meant whatever he'd found was a deviation. And Ruland hated deviations. I met him on his deck. Cryo Bay 2 was a low-light chamber strung with clearwalks above the tanks. The tanks themselves were transparent, filled with a slow-cycling nanofluid, blue-tinted, laced with repair agents and synaptic stasis chains. Ruland stood at Terminal 12, tapping through phase logs. "Talva came out of Cryo Phase 2, right?" "Yeah. Logged 17 days active. Why?" He tapped again, brought up a display. According to this, he was reactivated manually, by an override key, time-stamped to 30 hours before official phase initiation. "By who?" "Doesn't say." His voice was dry. Root-level access. And here's the better part. When the crew was assigned quarters, Talva was already logged as active. But there's no biometric confirmation from the tank. No exit camera footage. No thermal shift in the gel. I crossed my arms. So either someone woke him early, or he was already out. Ruland finally looked at me. Or something used his identity. We didn't speak for a while. Cryo fluid hummed behind us, circular currents running dead slow. I stared at Tank 9. No bubbles, no thermal change. Everything looked clean. But that's the thing with contamination. It hides inside procedure. Back in the morgue, I pulled Talva's autopsy footage onto the side monitor. Just a review, I told myself. Standard verification. The footage played normally. I watched myself make the cut. Watched the rib plate lift. Watched the lungs split under tension. But something was off. I rewound. Slowed the playback. Frame 1849 showed a 3-second overlay glitch. Just static at first, then a second layer, like another body projected over Talva's. Larger ribcage, different organ placement. I paused. Advanced frame by frame. In one still, the foreign lungs were visible, shaped wrong, triple-lobed with bifurcated bronchi. Not human, not even mammalian. I checked the file origin. Local. Recorded directly from FFT-90's internal array. I stood still, hands at my sides. Then I said out loud to no one, That wasn't a glitch, and I marked the case as open. The wall panel above the morgue's exit was sweating again. Not moisture. Condensate carries scent, leaves trace minerals. This was oily. I wiped it with my sleeve, then turned the smear toward the table scanner. Trace proteins. Not human, not fungal. Bond chains consistent with synthetic peptides, but irregular. No stored baseline matched them. I logged the sample under a provisional ID and walked out. I didn't seal the door behind me. No one else was using the morgue. The environmental systems module sat 3 junctions east, just past the primary circulation corridor. Hallway D32. The floor plating there was matte resin, but after 3 weeks of wear, it already showed heel patterns and spill shadows. You can see who walks fast, who drags their steps. We don't have a janitorial rotation. Filtration handles surface sterilization every 24 hours, unless the vents reroute, which they've started doing more often. Juno Beric had the cover off one of the intake nodes by the time I got to ENV. He didn't acknowledge me. He was elbow deep in duct housing, his left hand braced against the interior seal, while the right tugged free a compact mesh filter about the size of a man's forearm. He grunted. "That's number 5 this week." "Same node?" I asked. "Same damn grid, vent cluster D." He pulled the mesh free. It made a sound like skin separating from plastic wrap. The filter's surface was matte grey except where clots of translucent fibre had formed. It didn't look like mould. It looked like spun tendon, fibrous and wet-looking, with a faint amber sheen at the edges. Beric set it on the deck plate and squatted next to it. "This isn't clog. This is growth. It's anchoring into the mesh frame." Beric wasn't a scientist. He didn't use abstract terms. Habitat Atmospheric Technician was the colony's Tier 3 maintenance role for closed-loop environmental stability, meaning he kept the air breathable and the ducts intact. No prestige, no command access, just dirty work with high consequences. He grew up in Martian hab slums, where patching a leaky valve meant your family didn't suffocate. He knew when air systems were lying. He handed me the scan wand. "Sweep it, then watch the center." I calibrated the wand to low output field and passed it over the mesh. At first, standard readings. Carbon particulates, trace hydrocarbons, 2 anomalous organic clusters. Then as the beam reached the center, fluctuation. The mass twitched. "You see that?" he said. His voice wasn't panicked. He was past panic. "How long's it been out of the duct?" 10 minutes. Movement under passive scan? Twice. Same spot. I leaned in, pulled out a tissue probe and touched one of the thicker strands. It contracted. Not along its length. Not like a muscle. Just a slight retraction at the base, pulling away from the probe tip the way a sea anemone recoils from sudden change. It wasn't intelligent. It was responsive. "Thermal drift?" I asked. Beric shook his head. "Node interiors holding at 18.4 Celsius. Same as external." "Then it's not reflexive. It's reading contact." He stood and wiped his hands on his jumpsuit. "Command still says particulate overload. Said I probably breached a seal pack when I swapped the fan core. That was 3 filters ago." "They've seen the logs?" I sent them with audio. No reply. I slid the sample into a containment sleeve, locked the seal with a thermal clasp. "I've got an autopsy scheduled at 1100. I'll run it through the FFT, compare it against the tissue I pulled from Talva." "You still running blind?" "Standard diagnostics aren't flagging anything. It's outside expected genomic structures." Beric looked at the mesh again. "This shit's not outside anything. It's inside the ducts." On my way back through hallway B7, I passed Maro Uxley. He was crouched near one of the power conduits, checking a maintenance panel that had been removed and set upside down on the floor. Maro was one of the dormitory techs. He handled stasis quarters post-wake, thermal regulation, light cycling, waste access, soft systems. His fingers twitched slightly while he worked, like he was tuning something by feel instead of spec. "You good, Uxley?" I asked, slowing. He didn't look up. I think I'm still dreaming. Did you report for cognitive check? No, he muttered. No, I'm awake. But not where I should be. He stood abruptly. His shirt was inside out. He didn't notice. You feel sick? I don't know what I feel. He stepped around me and walked down the corridor, muttering to himself in uneven bursts. I noted his gait, off by 2 degrees, right foot dragging slightly. At 11:22, I started the autopsy on Edric Moll, logistics inventory tech, 38 years old, recovered unresponsive near the equipment cache. Initial report said cardiac failure, clean and simple, but his skin temp at time of retrieval was off, 41 Celsius. No fever symptoms logged before collapse. Moll's body was heavier than expected, not bloated, dense. Mass distribution had shifted. That's not common in post-thaw subjects unless there's edema or structural collapse. I scanned the abdominal cavity. The liver was gone. In its place, a spongiform mass with highly vascular channels. No sign of rupture. No sign of removal. It had grown there. The FFT-90's tissue scanner confirmed blood flow to the area during final moments. The body had accepted the organ as functional, but the cells weren't Moll's. The DNA was close, but carried multiple duplicated promoter regions, almost like synthetic replication, not cloned, mimicked. That wasn't possible. I flagged the file for internal hold, bypassed open medical database and stored it locally. If command wanted it, they'd have to ask me directly. At 15:30, Roland Geist called me again. I need you on Deck B, I've got another one. I didn't ask who. I just went. Cryo Deck B was colder than the others. The gel tanks emitted acoustic harmonics as they recycled, quiet but measurable. The effect is known as Helm-Rose resonance, micro-vibrations in long-term fluid suspension chambers that, when unbalanced, indicate improper flow or chemical contamination. Roland brought up the biometric overlay. Subject was never listed as active, never woke. But I recorded her walking through Junction Node 3 2 days ago. She looked right at me, said hello, used my name. I frowned. Who? Cressa Moan, hydrology tech, should have still been in Phase 2 stasis. Camera footage. Deleted from Central, but my visor cam caught it. I keep personal backup. He showed me the footage. Cressa, walking past smiling, carrying a tool wrap. No EVA suit, no thermal gear. Same ID tag she wore in the tank, same build, same gait. I checked tank 22. She was still inside, unmoved. I examined the fluid, and there it was again. The same fibrous webbing I'd found in Talva's lungs and in the duct mesh from Beric. Embedded at the base of her spine, almost invisible, unless you looked for it. I stared at Rulan. We need to know what this stuff is. He nodded. And we need to find out who, or what, is waking them. I left the cryo deck in silence and returned to the morgue. No new cases had come in. For once, the cold room felt empty in more than just body count. I sat at the console, pulled the FFT's scan logs, and ran a parallel overlay. 3 samples: Talva's bronchial mesh, Moll's synthetic organ mass, and the duct fiber Beric pulled from Node D. 3 different environments, 3 different modes of exposure, but the same bonding pattern. Not identical, related. Variants of the same structure. 1 environmental, 1 respiratory, 1 internalized. It wasn't spreading like a pathogen, it was operating like a system. The colony wasn't being infected, it was being integrated. They found Maro Uxley yesterday. Not his body, his jumpsuit, folded neatly on the floor of ventilation access node 7. Boots aligned, comms tag placed on top, still active. No blood, no trace. But the part that stayed with me was the thread. Each colonist on Peregrine Horizon had been permitted 1 personal modification to their standard issue gear. Nothing structural, no performance alterations. But we could stitch in a single coloured thread on the sleeve cuff. A psychological compromise to ease post-thaw orientation. Maro's was ochre. Martian soil color, he told me once. Kept him grounded. The thread was missing from the sleeve. I checked twice. I wasn't sentimental, I was thorough. That's when I requested a drone. Model Y6 Krill was an autonomous recon crawler. Low profile, segmented chassis, 6 multi-joint legs, forward thermal cam, and environmental tether. Normally deployed for topographic recon or shallow core sampling. I hadn't used one before. My work didn't extend outside pressure control zones, but Beric helped me load it into Transport Pod 3, just before the southern gate. "Why you?" he asked, tightening the drone's restraint latch. "Because no one else is treating the disappearances as physical phenomena." "You ever been outside?" "Not since landing." He blinked. "You know the terrain hasn't been cleared. Stormfront's still parked 3 clicks west." "Then we stay east." He gave me a long look, not mocking, just wondering what finally pushed me out of the morgue. I didn't explain. Didn't say that I'd cross-referenced drone telemetry with atmospheric CO2 drift logs and found a pattern. Or that the thermal sensors had registered symmetrical temperature anomalies under sector grid S9. Or that one of the dead, Mal, had a microfracture in his femur from a mineral not present anywhere in the habitat's infrastructure. I didn't say any of that. I just stepped into the prep chamber and sealed my helmet. EOS 7's surface was quiet. Not still, quiet. Movement wasn't absent. It was displaced. The terrain near the southern perimeter was a broad floodplain, fractured with sediment channels and dust-hardened ridges. Pale orange dust overlaid darker subsoil, riddled with fine striations. Not natural erosion, deposition, as if something beneath had pushed upward, gently, repeatedly over time. I led the krill on foot. Its legs hissed, reacting to every micro-contour of the terrain. I adjusted its scanning vector to 60 degrees lateral sweep, then set the array to deeper penetration. The southern grid, S9, was marked as low-priority exploration terrain, designated null by initial drone sweep 17 days post-landing, too rocky for habitation modules, low atmospheric pressure drop, no known geothermal readings. But that was based on AI-driven heuristics, not manual confirmation. I trusted my tools, not the colony's assumptions. We walked 900 meters without incident. The air outside the dome was thick but breathable. EOS 7's atmosphere registered 17% oxygen, 82% nitrogen, with trace methane and xenon. But something about the balance felt off, like it lingered longer in the mouth, heavier, denser molecular inertia. I could taste the oxygen molecules between words. At 941 meters, the krill halted. Its lead sensor spike had locked onto a regular signal, magnetic instruction loop, 4 Hz flat oscillation. I linked my suit HUD to its feed. The pattern was timed, regulated. I marked the point and began clearing the upper soil layer with a compact vibro spade. At 14 centimeters down, I hit something smooth. I stopped. The exposed surface was alloy. It had a finish like annealed tungsten but bore no markings. I tapped it once with the spade. It rang, dull tone, thick, buried. I took a sample and ran the portable composition analysis. Carbon titanium composite, reinforced with silicon crosslinks. Elemental analysis estimated the material to be approximately 600 years old. Predates the Peregrine Horizon. I called Ruland Geis through private channel. He answered on the 3rd ping. Sounded like he hadn't slept. "There's something under S9, I said. "A structure. Buried sensor array. It's active." Pause. Then, "That's not possible. The only surface equipment deployed was ours. Post-descent. Check terraformation manifest. Anything from the pre-ignition period?" "I'll need red level access. Hyrule will flag it." "Let him. We don't work for protocol anymore." He didn't argue. I sat next to the exposed surface and opened the sample sleeve, traced a pattern in the dust with my glove. Then I set the krill to passive watch mode and took a breath. The wind shifted. Faint at first, then slightly stronger. From the south. That's when I saw the residue, a pale smear on the edge of my boot print. Same sheen as the tissue mass from Talva's lungs. Same branching structure. But here, on the rock, outside. The contamination wasn't confined to the colony systems. It was the environment. No, it was the environment's response to us. I took 3 samples, logged coordinates, and returned to the dome perimeter. Inside, Beric was waiting by the airlock. "You see it?" he asked as I stepped out. "Not all of it," I said. "But enough." He handed me a wipe. "Then you need to see this too." He led me through ENV module toward the auxiliary filtration station, normally used to process external air samples from drone returns. The chamber was sealed. Inside, a mesh cluster had been suspended from the ceiling like a dissected lung. It was breathing. The mass contracted slightly, then expanded, slow, rhythmic, at 6.2-second intervals. "It's been doing that for an hour," Beric said. "We didn't connect power." "Where did it come from?" "One of the drones, not Krill, a Y4 model, returned from a survey run near S9. My hands were steady, but my chest felt compressed. "Someone seeded this place," I said. "A long time ago." Beric crossed his arms. "And it's still running." "No, it's still adapting." We watched the thing breathe. The pattern wasn't just organic, it was programmed. The thing that used to be part of our filtration mesh had stopped moving. It hadn't collapsed, it hadn't desiccated. It just ceased the breathing rhythm, as though the external cycle it was syncing to had gone silent, as if it had completed its function. I sampled a portion of the central node, a webbed cluster of fused pseudo-epithelial fibers, and analyzed it in isolation. The FFT scanner flagged intracellular remnants of non-human nucleotides arranged in triplet patterns, not alien, artificial. The strand bore partial homology with archived records of auto-adaptive terraforming microbes, specifically from Protocol XA, the last officially sanctioned biogenic atmosphere project from the Interplanetary Governance Authority. But Protocol XA had been declared non-viable 90 years before launch. Failures in strain containment during early trials resulted in unregulated biomass generation and biocompatibility drift. The program was terminated, samples destroyed, or so the record said. But this wasn't XA. This was something else, something updated. Rulan Geiss met me outside Cryo Deck 1 with his hands shaking. That was rare. Rulan treated stress like a faulty phase sync. Identify, recalibrate, restore baseline. "There's a file," he said without preamble. "Read access only, encrypted inside the long-wave comms buffer. Shouldn't have even been in local storage." "Who accessed it last?" "No one," he said. "It wasn't opened, just loaded into memory. It's been sitting in cryocore since before we landed." He handed me a data stick. Matte black, no labeling, just a soft rubber ridge on one side. It wasn't colony issue. I took it back to the morgue. I loaded it into an isolated diagnostic terminal, disconnected from both the primary net and external logs. The file was titled Terraform Protocol AB, Subroutine, Regenerative Loop Contingency. It took 13 minutes to decrypt, no password. Just a time lock release based on arrival timestamp. Someone on Earth had intended for this to unlock only after surface colonization had begun. The first page was a mission briefing. Not to us. To a pre-expansion engineering team based out of Epsilon Orbital, dated 84 years before launch. The briefing described a secondary terraforming initiative, AB, a classified successor to XA. It had no safety containment, no halting code. The microbial strain was designed not to mimic terrestrial biology, but to consume it and recompile it into localized metabolic scaffolds. It didn't kill by aggression, it killed by adaptation. Every cell it touched, it studied. If it couldn't replicate, it replaced. If it couldn't replace, it incorporated. That was the loop. Life becomes regulator, death becomes feedback. We weren't here to terraform the planet. We were here to inherit its failed memory. At 4:20 in the morning, I heard the first alarm, localized flow inconsistencies across HAB2 and the main power spine, vents reversing, air moving without instruction. Beric and I suited up and took a bypass access route through maintenance node G. The duct lining was wet, not condensation, viscous. It clung to the gloves and stretched in thread-like bands when we brushed it. Biofilm, with embedded particles too uniform to be incidental. When we scanned the mass, it returned a 3-tiered protein sequence with human cytokine analogues embedded within it. It was rewriting itself. "It's breathing back," Beric muttered, almost too low to register. "It's not just the air system anymore," I said. "It's mimicking command structure, input-output behavior, response patterns." He looked up. "You're saying it's learning from us?" "No, I'm saying it's integrating us." We initiated a hard shutdown of the secondary loop. The vents didn't close, they stayed open. Fully mechanical override failed. Beric looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen from him before. Complete vacancy. Like the system had turned his knowledge to noise. I grabbed the emergency bypass panel and cut power at the breaker. That worked. The duct closed manually with a stutter and a metallic scrape, like it was trying to resist the closure. Later that morning, Dax Hyrule came to the morgue. He didn't knock. He never does. He stood across from me at the autopsy table where I was analyzing a tissue coil from one of the missing crew. Beck Arn. His body had been recovered from a drone, half folded into a containment crate. The torso was still intact, but the legs had begun to show signs of fusion, ligament to ligament, as if something had begun rethreading his musculature for a different configuration. "You accessed restricted cryofiles," Hyrule said. "Red level." "Yes. Why?" "Because your systems missed the point." He narrowed his eyes. "Which point?" "That this isn't infiltration. It's feedback. We triggered it when we landed." He stared for several seconds, then set a portable core drive on the bench. It held a slice of the primary logs from the Terraformation Control Center. "Sealed since the day we touched down." "I ran a secondary index sweep," he said. "Command never did a checksum after landing. I did. And there are files in the Terraformation core that were never assigned to colony ops. Embedded firmware, partial neural maps, human maps. Who? Doesn't say. The maps are fragments, compression models. They look like identity backups." I turned to him. "From Earth?" "No, from here, from the crew." I exhaled once through my nose. "They've been copying us, fragment by fragment, through the air, through the ducts." He nodded. "What do we do?" It was the first time I'd heard Hyrule ask a question without turning it into a threat. I brought up the declassified Protocol AB file and pointed to the failsafe clause. Regenerative loop contingency. Surface sterilization protocol buried in the terraformation core. Last resort. Triggers total surface combustion using the colony's atmospheric nitrogen-oxygen mix as oxidizer. Targeted detonation of structural fuel seals via automated drone network. Success probability 63%. Survivability projection 4%. Beric arrived 10 minutes after Hyrule left. He didn't knock. He ducked under the frame of the morgue doorway, still wearing his patched utility jumpsuit, grease blackened at the cuffs. He looked at me, then the FFT monitor, then the containment sleeves stacked on the tray behind me. "You got the plan?" I said. He scratched at the side of his jaw where the edge of his rebreather mask had rubbed raw during the last exterior cycle. "I heard," he muttered. "You need someone on the western ignition point." I nodded. "Duct fed. Vent loop Delta 9. It's manual override only. Pressure plates have to be reset from inside." "How narrow?" 73 centimeters at midpoint. You won't fit with full rig." "Then I won't wear one." "That crawl's 100 meters long. Power's unstable. You'll lose O2 inside 10 minutes. He didn't flinch. He glanced at his hands, rubbed thumb to palm like testing for nerve response. "Yeah," he said, "I know." We didn't shake hands. He just turned and left through access corridor C, his boots scraping dust into the floor seams. He didn't look back. 10 minutes later, Rulan Geiss's voice came over the private channel. His speech was tight, clipped, his usual cadence reduced to fragments. "I found them," he said. "The neural overlays, Cryo Deck 1, 3 tanks. Live? Fragments, partial signature loops, not full minds, just echoes. The glitch tanks? Not glitched," he said. "Rewritten, they copied the activation patterns, residual cognition. The infection's been using them as template banks. How long to shut them down? Shutdown's not enough. The interface subroutine is buried in the redundancy chain. You kill it from the outside, it restarts elsewhere. I'll stay in." I stood there, one hand on the FFT console, the other clenched at my side. "If I isolate the loop from the inside, cut the sync at the neural bridge, it'll sever clean. One-time burn, no restart. You'll fry the secondary stasis core. Yeah, but the rest will hold. I know," he said. The channel closed. Hyrule was the last to speak. He didn't come back in, just stood in the corridor outside the morgue, holding the red drive unit like it weighed more than it did. "I'll trigger the sequence from operations," he said. "Root access has to be authenticated by command node." "I have it," he replied. "Partial override, enough to confirm the final call. You know what happens once the drones fire. The sterilization loop will run full sphere. Ops is in the primary envelope." He looked at me then. I saw no suspicion, no regulatory posture, just acceptance. "I've spent my whole life flagging non-compliance," he said. "Chasing deviations. Maybe I missed the biggest one of all. You can still walk away." "No," he said. "I'm not interested in survival metrics anymore." He turned and walked toward the central corridor. One by one, they left. Beric into the vent crawl behind the West Hab node. Geiss into the cryo core, sealing the deck behind him with an internal lockout code. Hyrule into operations, where his signal blinked once on my feed and then stopped transmitting. I remained in the morgue. It was the last place in the colony untouched by illusion. I stood next to the FFT-90. Its surface was bare, just the residue of observation, quiet, inert, waiting for conclusion. The ambient pressure dropped by 0.4 kilopascals. The tone in the ventilation shifted, 3 decibels down. It meant the ducts were rerouting airflow again, one last adaptive response. I opened the final protocol. The interface asked for confirmation. I entered my name. It accepted the command without protest. And outside, the sky over EOS 7 turned a hard, brilliant orange. The planet began to burn. The first ignition wave triggered at 11:32 planetary local. I didn't watch it directly. The exterior cam feeds went blank after the oxidizer envelopes reached combustion threshold. There was no dramatic explosion, just light, so bright it overwhelmed the spectrum filters, followed by a spreading collapse in the drone network's telemetry. One by one, each drone's signal went to static, then to silence. The sky dimmed 30 seconds later from particulate saturation. The burn phase had turned the outer atmosphere into a temporary shroud. High-altitude nitrogen and volatile hydrocarbon layers oxidized into particulate haze. From the surface, it looked like a slow dusk moving inward from every direction. The internal lights dimmed next. That wasn't environmental. That was the grid giving up. I stayed in the morgue. I had sealed the doors and shut down auxiliary power. Not out of fear. Containment was already meaningless. I did it because I wanted the last recording to run clean. The black box recorder sat mounted in the corner above the FFT-90. Red diode steady. I had jury-rigged a redundant power pack to it. Isolated, shielded, low draw. Just enough to keep the archive recording in case core power failed. I sat on the edge of the table. No body bags left. No fresh samples. Just the final case report. I keyed the mic. Final entry, Nomar Arik, Post-Mortem Systems Lead, EOS 7 Colonial Division. I paused. No ambient noise. Not even the normal air drift that always carried just enough pressure feedback to tell you the habitat was alive. The ducts had gone still. There are no survivors remaining in ops, no signal from the cryo deck, no response from the west vent crawl. Last audio from Beric indicated partial seal breach and O2 failure at 10 minutes, 16 seconds. Final message from Geis logged an override confirmation followed by cranial sync disruption at Cryo Node 3. Estimated death occurred between 10:48 and 10:52. I kept my voice steady. I completed the final override at 11:01. Protocol AB's regenerative loop was terminated via synchronized ignition and atmospheric burn, as outlined in the contingency file embedded within the original terraformation package. I looked down at my hands. No tremor. A small abrasion on the left wrist from where I'd leaned too hard against the FFT's armature during Geis's call. The skin around it had begun to redden. I wasn't infected, but the microbial signatures had never needed direct contact to adjust their vectors. I took a breath and continued. The truth is this. We were never meant to colonize EOS 7. The environment wasn't neutral, it wasn't dormant. It was mid-cycle. Terraform Protocol AB wasn't designed to create a habitable biosphere. It was designed to generate one, by consuming whatever biological inputs arrived. Flora, fauna, human. All the same to the system. I slid off the table and walked to the containment tray. I opened one of the sealed sleeves and removed the last tissue sample. Moll's altered organ structure, still partially intact. It adapted faster than expected. The crew became part of its calibration loop. Our respiratory systems, neural signatures, immune responses, they weren't attacked. They were measured, modeled, replicated at structural resolution. I placed the sample under the FFT's manual viewer. I didn't run the scanner. No power left. I looked at it through glass. Simple. Analog. The way I trusted. We thought terraforming meant reshaping planets. We were wrong. The protocol reshaped us. We were the soil. I returned to the mic. I don't know if anyone will hear this. The transmission beacon is locked to loop every 30 minutes. It'll repeat this recording until the power fails. I've isolated the core archive. If the next wave lands, they'll know what happened. Outside the morgue wall, something gave. A groan, metal and polymer bowing under a pressure shift. I looked at the final command screen. The interface still glowed. Dim now, fading. I keyed one last line into the log. The terraformer ran too long. The infection adapted too fast. We weren't meant to inherit this world. We were meant to be raw material. I sealed the recorder. No ceremony, no last words. I wasn't here to eulogize the colony. I was here to finish the report. The lights dimmed a final time. The ducks stayed silent. And I waited. Not for rescue. Just for conclusion. The lander touched down 12 kilometers north of the EOS Prime perimeter. Surface readings registered within acceptable margins. Atmospheric composition stable. Oxygen fractions slightly higher than pre-arrival projections. No seismic instability. No active flora above the microbial threshold, and no high-energy radiation signatures. The mission clock ticked clean. Commander Halric Stenz was the first to disembark. His boots left deep impressions in the surface crust, which fractured under pressure into light, flake-like ash-glass shale. Burn residues. Silicon-laced, carbon-rich. Not natural stratification, these were signs of high-temperature oxidation. Old burns. Stenz raised his visor slightly, just enough to confirm the tinting wasn't a visual distortion. It wasn't. The floodplain beyond was laced with branching surface patterns like heat-scoured arteries, the remains of something structural melted into the terrain. "Record Phase 1 landing complete," he said, activating his wristlink. "Commence recon sweep. HAB modules will anchor on Ridge 3. Drone telemetry suggests artifact density is highest southwest of that slope. We'll locate the original deployment zone and salvage what's viable." By the third hour, one of the drone handlers, Ornell, a quiet one, competent, flagged an anomaly. They found it beneath the slumped wreckage marking the edge of what had once been Medical Module 3. A box-shaped unit, half buried under bent conduit and collapsed bracing. An old model manual beacon core, charred around the seams but visibly intact. Analog fallback signal, no AI coupling. A redundancy protocol from early generation ARC ships. The tech team linked a portable cell into the beacon's base. The indicator diode turned amber, then green. Signal resumed. Clear, low band. The voice was dry, even, male. Final entry, Nomar Arik, Post-Mortem Systems Lead, EOS-7 Colonial Division. Stenz stood behind the team, arms crossed, saying nothing as the loop played out. There were no breaks, no static, just a detailed autopsy report of failure, biological, systemic, and operational. No dramatics, no appeals, just the facts, repeated every 30 minutes. When it finished, the only sound was the tick of wind shifting loose composite flakes across the ground. Stenz exhaled once. How long's this been broadcasting? Ornell checked the data trace. Last unbroken loop logged 81 years ago. It's degraded, but the sequence is still clean. Anything on residual biosignatures? No active signals, but the soil matrix has irregular protein strands, non-native configuration. Nothing reactive. Stenz looked toward the collapsed dome remains. A long silence. Mark the site, he said finally. Tag the data and push it to off-world relay for forensics. Ornell hesitated. Commander, what if the contamination wasn't fully burned out? Stenz didn't answer at first. He turned toward the open plain beyond the wreckage, flat, wind-carved, dead quiet. If anything's still alive under there, he said, we'll find it. He stepped away from the beacon. Behind him, the voice continued, calm as bone. The terraformer ran too long. The infection adapted too fast. We weren't meant to inherit this world. We were meant to be raw material,